We're joined for what should be a very interesting discussion and kind of a fun discussion as well, because the guest who is joining us has an interesting perspective to bring to our discussion on the fan this morning in a couple of different areas. Altagracia Pierre Outerbridge is the founder and owner of the New York City-based law firm Outerbridge Law PC, which is on the web, by the way, at Outerbridge Law. That's all as one word, .com. Her practice focuses on landlord tenant litigation and transactional matters. And she's joining us to give some perspective in that area. She is also an immigration attorney, and she herself is a Haitian American. So we're going to get into talking a little bit about that experience as well in the course of our discussion. First of all, it's nice to have you join us on our program.
Thank you, Mr. Salter. Thank you for having me.
Welcome. I guess in beginning this discussion, let's do a little bit. I always like to set some background for folks who are listening to our chats here. How do you explain what motivated you in becoming an attorney with the kind of specialty in the area where you focus?
Oh, wow. So we have two focus areas. One of them, one main one is landlord tenant. The other one is immigration. So I would say landlord tenant, both of them chose me, right? I think it would probably be more glamorous to say I chose them, but they chose me. So I'm an immigrant. So, and I went through a horrific immigration experience. So I want to help others because I went through it. I understand it. I know the fears that come with it. I came from Haiti when I was 15. Just me and my little brother for a while, right? I was 15, he was 12, and we went through it, right? Which is a very immigrant experience, painful, long, exhausting. So immigration chose me. Landlord tenant, you kind of fall into, I fell into it. I love it. I can talk about it all day, and I just can talk about landlord tenant. It's a very specific area of law. It actually helps people. Because everyone wants to live in a decent place, right? So both of them chose me, and here I am.
When you say it's a distinct form of litigation, the landlord-tenant matters, why do you say that? What makes it so distinct?
Well, I think most people don't realize how much procedure is involved in landlord tenant. Landlord tenant is a very, very procedural area of law. You don't get to just practice it, right? I've been at it for about 15 years. You're still learning. It's an area of law that is underestimated, right? I think folks believe that, I don't know, mergers, acquisitions, this or that, but landlord tenant is very procedural. Getting your case correct as a landlord, very procedural. There are time frames for everything. There's a statute for everything, right? So if you're dabbling in landlord tenant, you're not gonna do well dabbling in it. It's very procedural. Landlord tenant practitioners are very proud of their work and they pride themselves in knowing what they're doing. So some of us do it, not a lot of us, right? Which makes it super interesting. We know each other in New York City. And we do it every day. And you know who does it every day. You can tell who knows what they're doing because you would have heard of them most likely. And they're the dabblers, right? If you're dabbling in it, thinking that you're representing a friend or a family member, or you may be in for a rude awakening because it's a very specific area of law. Case law is changing, especially during this pandemic. Landlord tenant has been one of the hardest hit, the fastest changing in the pandemic due to the eviction moratorium, what papers you send, what papers you don't send, papers that are amended, right? So we have people calling us, every day saying, I served this notice, right? And it's like, okay, well, there's an executive order that said you were supposed to attach this. I served that notice. Well, the person Spanish speaking, did you serve it in Spanish? Right? Like very, 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 very intricate area of law. And it's hard for landlords mostly because mostly they're the ones bringing the case, right? And procedurally, if you don't have it right, your case will probably be dismissed because a lot of landlord tenant in terms of eviction defense is procedural defenses. You didn't serve me properly. I'm a Spanish speaker. you sent me the hardship declaration in English, right? I'm not gonna say your case will be dismissed, but you're met with a lot of procedural defenses. And if you are, especially if you're representing the landlord, right, the prosecuting party, you better know what you're doing.
Okay, now one thing I didn't mention in introducing you is you, as I understand it, you represent both landlords and tenants.
Correct.
All right. Um, as I say that, I think, well, how on earth do you stay on top of all the changes that must be taking place, literally on both sides? And then, that would be just normal. Then you throw in the pandemic and the effect from that. I mean, what has the past year and a half, shall I say, been like in this area of law in New York City?
I mean, we meet once, twice a month as practitioners, right? And the judges are gracious enough to meet with us. So you get to ask your questions. If you are an LNT practitioner, you want to stay on top of it. You want to stay with the group. You want to attend the housing practitioner meetings, and you want to ask judges the questions as to how they would handle this, what happens here, because some of this is not well developed yet, right? So it's groupthink and keeping on top of the meetings and reading the executive orders, speaking to the city marshals because they are a big part of the process of eviction or eviction defense. They also they are the final step, right? They also keep up with what's going on. I mean, we are also a very generous bunch in terms of knowledge. So you can call most of our practitioners, right? And say what's going on here. And I hope folks think they can call on me, but you have to attend the meetings. It's not something you can sit on. You have to be part of the group. The group is evolving, right? There are Manhattan practitioner meetings, there are Brooklyn practitioner meetings, there are quick Queens practitioner, because there are differences even there. I attend Brooklyn, Queens, Manhattan, and the Bronx, right? You just attend all of them. And the more you attend, the more folks are asking questions, the more you are like, oh, I forgot this piece, or not I forgot, but that's an interesting piece, right? You just got to keep up.
Wow, I mean, this sounds like not just a full-time job, but almost a 24-hour a day job in terms of trying to keep up with this. Because I guess my question is, how often are there being revisions, changes taking place in this area of law? Because there had to be, I'm assuming, from the start of the real onset of COVID, to even this time last year, changes that took place. And
So,
then we see all the changes that took place in the latter portion of last year. And then here we are, we're in the end of September of this year. We've had all this time to have basically 9 months of revisions, changes, upgrades, and the like.
So I can't even count how many times it's changed. There are many ways landlord tenant has changed. One of them is administrative orders, which comes from the administrative judge, right, of the city of New York, right? So that's going to change how the practice is done. The other one is the executive orders from the governor, right? The administrative orders are seeking to interpret the executive orders, how it's actually supposed to play on the ground. Then you have directives from the housing court. The housing court actually issues directives, right? So all of it comes together somehow, some way, and you call the clerk, right? You figure it out. You call the clerk. If you love landlord tenant, then it's exciting.
Well, I guess the question then becomes, why is it? I mean, this sounds like, pardon my expression, but madness to keep up with this. Okay, why do you love it?
I mean, I don't know of anything that's more important, right, than a person's home, right? Like if you're in your home, that's your solace. That's where you want to be comfortable. You want the hot water, right? It's a basic human need. So being able to alleviate that for someone is huge, right? Somebody saying Ida flooded my apartment, and then being able to get it fixed, right? With recalcitrant landlords, right? someone saying, I don't know, my sink or I mean, it's basic stuff. People work, they expect to live in a good place. And it's not even, we know that people of color have the worst apartment conditions, right? That's statistics, right? But New York City has bad apartment conditions, right? So when somebody calls, it's really a matter of dignity. It's a matter of respect. So when you get the apartment fixed, force the landlord, right? If you are representing the tenant and you're the landlord and you want rent paid, which is also basic, right? Like you want money for services. It's really hitting at where it hurts. Not getting paid for the rent. That's an affront, right? It feels like an affront that somebody's using your home, right, or your investment property and not paying you. So either way, you get to relieve a lot of emotional stress, right? And you're helping somebody meet a basic need. So that's exciting, right? It's overlooked, right? But people need help getting adequate housing, keeping adequate housing. You have expensive apartments, right? 1040, we represent clients with $40,000-$50,000 apartments, right? And $800 apartments a month, right? And either of them can come with major needs for repairs. So it's not even a guarantee if you get a penthouse that the landlord will actually fix your broken, glass shower door, right? Or that the landlord will do the construction to say that the way they're going to do it, that you have a child and there's lead in the apartment, right? That there's asbestos, there is mold. I mean, you and I believe that when you go home, you should be at peace, right? A lot of people, you can't take that for granted. Roaches, mice, rats. We have a case now with lack of gas for over 2 years, right? Lack of electricity, right? It's a lot. And when you come home, you work hard and you imagine that, you should have a decent home. That's just a basic human need. So for me, it's exciting. It's deep. For me, it's a very deep need. It's a fundamental need that you get to meet.
When we talk about the situation that COVID has placed on, let's start first with landlords, in terms of eviction moratoriums or directives or things like that. I mean, one of the questions that I think naturally comes up for a lot of people is, realistically, how do landlords survive without getting paid for what I'm assuming are very long stretches of time?
Correct. So we have a landlord who's owed 200K, right? It's all amounts of money. How? So you're technically supposed to be able to submit a hardship affidavit for your mortgage, just like the tenants are able to submit a hardship affidavit to your mortgagee and say that I'm experiencing COVID hardship. So there is you're right. So you're able to push that on the other end, technically, right, and tell the bank you can't foreclose, right? Making payment plans with your tenants, right? And folks believe that landlords are supposed to have some kind of a fund, right, for these emergencies, right? It's not real for the smaller landlords or even larger landlords, but the big picture is the emergency rental assistance of 2.6 billion in New York that's supposed to be doled out to these landlords. But landlords are suffering. Landlords call crying, weeping, right? So I tell them to call their legislator, right, and direct it that way and write letters and do what they express themselves. But it's frustrating and right, it's I don't know what to say. It's how do they go without it? Foreclosures are not proceeding, right, or not proceeding at the same pace. So it's really I'm not going to say a standstill, but foreclosures also take a while to get to, and they are very procedural just as well. So it's a long way to foreclose on the home too, right? So you're not going to quite get there in the last 18 months of this pandemic if it's pandemic related.
Interesting discussion that we're having on our program on the Fan, joined by Altagracia Pierre Outerbridge. She's the founder, owner of New York City-based law firm Outerbridge Law PC, on the web at Outerbridge Law, that's all as one word.com. And she's joined us by phone. The Sports Edge program follows our program this morning at 7 after a look around the sporting world. Now, one of the thoughts I had heading into this discussion today, too, is to flip the discussion over to the eviction moratoriums, directives, things like that in that area, from talking about landlords to what is this realistically meant for tenants? Because I guess there's a certain breath of fresh air um, initially at not having to make that payment of rent. But in the long run, what is the tenant's actual obligation?
Mhm, mhm. Well, the obligations haven't changed. That's one thing the moratorium didn't do. It didn't change the obligation to pay rent, right? It says that you're not quite going to get evicted, i.e. your door is not going to be locked or your or the locks change, right? But the obligations remain the same. In terms of late fees, it's hard to get late fees. It was hard before then with the HSTPA, which passed in June 2019, right? So late fees clearly are technically due. That's hard to get.
Mhm.
At least in housing court, you're not permitted to seek late fees as part of an eviction, right? As part of, because it's not rent. You may be able to in another court, but housing court, most practitioners try to not seek late fees, and I think it's actually prohibited by the HSTPA. So in terms of the 18-month late fees, that's taken care of. In terms of what are tenants doing? They should be applying for rental assistance. I know that if you're making 80 to 120K of the AMI, the area median income, you are eligible to apply for the rental assistance, right? So that takes care of a lot of people who are not previously eligible. Tenants are waiting for the shoe to drop, right? If they haven't received the ERAP, emergency rental assistance, then I don't know that anyone's sleeping soundly, right? Landlords are afraid that the debt will become so high that it's not feasible,
Right.
right? And the longer this goes, I mean, we literally have landlords who are owed 200K, right, in luxury apartments. So it's hitting across the board. Your $10,000 apartment, you probably can pay the rent. Then we have landlords whose tenants have left the apartment, right, and not properly broken the lease. So those folks are saying, hey, we have a deal. You had a 2-year lease. What happened? Like, I need my money. So there are a lot of legal issues that need to be looked at, whether or not there'll be cases that find that it was impossible to pay the rent. Therefore, there's some break that remains to be seen because no one expected this pandemic.
Mm. So, in the aftermath of the pandemic and in the real world, can a landlord actually sue a tenant?
In the aftermath, a landlord can always sue a tenant. Always. At this point, you can sue a tenant. Still, it's whether or not there are many things. Whether or not you receive a hardship declaration. So if you're supposed to serve hardship declarations, if you don't receive it signed back, right, saying I had a hardship, then you can proceed. So it's not an
Mm.
automatic that you cannot sue, right? You are technically prohibited from continuing if you receive a hardship declaration based on health, due to COVID health reasons or financial reasons. A lot of tenants are not sending them back, right? So that means a case should proceed. Then you're met with an administrative moratorium, which is a backlog of cases in the housing court. So it's not that cases are not proceeding, because a lot of tenants are not sending back the hardship declaration, which is a mistake if you're a tenant. And for landlord, it's a good thing, right? But you proceed. What we know has happened with the last moratorium extension in New York is that landlords are able to now contest a hardship declaration meaningfully and say, you did not suffer, like, prove to me that you suffered a hardship, which is supposed to stop tenants from improperly saying this, improperly sending it willy-nilly, right? The hardship declaration, which is supposed to be served with every eviction proceeding or foreclosure proceeding. So ultimately, landlords have a leg to stand on to say, I've received your hardship declaration, I am proceeding, I don't believe you suffered a hardship because I've seen how you've lived in the last 18 months, right, at my expenses, right? So it's not that you can't sue. You can always sue, but you're going to be met with the massive backlog in housing court, which is its own moratorium.
So how extensive is that backlog in housing court?
So I don't want to misquote the number, but I believe it was at 18,000. I don't want to misquote the number or offend anyone, but it's thousands. Correct.
Wow.
Correct.
So basically, we're talking, I'm assuming, months
Correct.
of delay?
Correct.
Wow.
Maybe a year.
Wow.
Even. Yes. So the tenants entitled pretty much to the first adjournment, which is 4 to 6 weeks in regular times, right? So I just went on a case yesterday in Nassau County Housing Court. We served a year ago. We had our first appearance yesterday, and the tenant obtained an adjournment for a month, right? So housing court was always straddled with delay, right? It was always the case that delay is a housing court thing, right? Judges have a lot going on, right? the amount of people who get sued versus the amount of judges, right, was always a big deal, and delay works in favor of the tenant. It's not good to fast forward eviction cases either politically, right? To make them fast. Right, because then the burden falls on the city with the shelter system, right? So it was always a slow process, maybe by design. I'm not sure, or just the sheer amount of people who get sued, right? But there's no I don't see an end to a landlord getting a trial or a full hearing on a regular non-payer holdover case for a long time.
I think a natural question as well in our discussion is, where does, I guess, the idea of harassment on the part of a landlord from the idea of the tenant's perspective or the tenant's rights, where does that factor into this? In other words, how far can a landlord go?
Interesting. So I've heard a lot in this pandemic, right? I received a call where the tenant said the landlord moved in. The landlord moved in, right? That's real harassment. The landlord is coming out of the shower unclothed, right? A woman, right? So like really harassing me. The landlord's trying to sleep in my bed, right? Like because they want me out. The legal process is not fast enough, right? Literally landlords moving in with a suitcase saying this is my place, you need, like, that's really harassment, right? And then you have the right, it feels like I still remember the call where I'm just like, oh my god, like that's a lot for a landlord to do. But folks are using extreme measures, right? I mean, clearly there are harsh words being exchanged, there's tension on both sides, from that extreme to landlords locking doors, actually locking the door, which is a misdemeanor, right? Illegal lockouts, to landlords not doing repairs, which is I would say, I'm not going to say subdued, but it's less straightforward form of harassment, because continued failure to do repairs is harassment, right? So you have the gamut. How far can the landlord go? I would say follow the legal process and be aggressive there. And there are ways, you probably should negotiate something if you can, right? Negotiation, that there's no form of a negotiation. There's no parameters to what you negotiate. Maybe it's a vacatur, right? With, they call it cash for keys. I don't know. I'm not advising. I'm not saying it's good for every situation, but some situations that may be the right scenario. I don't know that calling a tenant and being aggressive on the phone constitutes harassment, but I mean, numerous times may become harassment, right? Tenants are aware so they need to pay rent. So I'm not sure calling saying you owe me rent is harassment, but at some point landlords have gotten aggressive and tenants are responding in kind and vice versa.
Has it gotten to the point where a tenant will sue a landlord for emotional distress?
So we get this question all the time, right? So harassment, so that would be a personal injury. I always tell tenants this is that's a personal injury case. It's no longer a housing court if you believe it's emotional distress. The housing court does permit a harassment case to be brought, right? So you could sue for repairs and or harassment and say that landlord has harassed me, kicked my door in, punched the door, hit the door. and there would be fines, right? And what happens with harassment and with retaliation is that the landlord has some penalties, i.e. cannot, with retaliation at least, they cannot evict for a while if they're found to have retaliated, if you report repairs not being done. So there are many things in housing court. Housing court is a court of very specific jurisdiction, and it tries to stay in its lane, right? Which is, I want your repairs done, I want the rent paid, I'm looking at this one thing: eviction defense, repairs, right? It doesn't go, it's very procedural, but it doesn't go beyond that. So, but if you're talking about personal injury, and we get these calls all the time, right? Can I sue for $1 million for emotional distress, right? I've had anxiety since this landlord has done this. And I usually say, call a personal injury lawyer, because that's outside the realm of housing court. Number one. Number two, you probably would be hard pressed to prove it, right? We know that you would have to prove damages. So I always tell tenants, I'm not one to tell you what to do, because that's not my area of expertise, personal injury, but I would want to say that you probably need to prove damages, economic damages for what you claim you suffered. It's not just that your feelings are hurt, right? Or that somebody's aggressive. You probably need to prove damages, and you probably would be hard pressed to find a personal injury lawyer that would take that case.
Amazing, an amazing discussion we're having on our program. Law school students, is this an area of law that you recommend
Absolutely.
they get into?
Absolutely. It's underestimated, right? Landlord tenant, I'm glad it found me. I am very, it's so exciting. It's just such an exciting area of practice. It's mentally challenging. We have, we represent large landlords with class actions with hundreds of tenants on the other side. So there's no shortage of stories, and there's no shortage of drama either. It's not dry as it looks like it would be. And it's meeting somebody's very, very basic need. And people are very grateful once they get their hot water running. If you're dealing with repairs, right? Once they get the landlord to respect their dignity. Once they get the landlord to allow their emotional support pet, right? Once they get the super to stop harassing them. I mean, your home is your solace. You want to come home and be at peace, right? It brings immediate relief to people, and it's actually it's challenging, right? There's also a lot of math involved. Right? It's not dry. Absolutely. It's not dry at all. It's not dry. We represent a landlord right now with a class action, right? A potential class action. I don't want to say too much about it, but there are many tenants on the other side. So that the quantity of it, the claims, it's something, and we actually respect each other's intellect, because I've been impressed with my colleagues with how intelligent they are.
I didn't ask you a question about the housing court and the procedures that are taking place. Was there a period of time where everything was virtual, and has that changed now fully?
So it was supposed to be, we were told September 23, as far as the last meeting that I attended, was supposed to be the start. It is a slower rollout, and I mean, it's new territory. But for the last year, I've practiced on Zoom, right? Hearings, it's on Teams, not Zoom. It went from Zoom to Teams, or Skype to Teams. So yes, you meet the judge on Teams, right on your computer. There's a time allotted, whether it's be 30 minutes for your case. So it's actually you have a time slot. Some counties have a time slot, and they adhere by it. It goes by the judge too. And some you can start at 9, and you do, I guess you can do other work, right, and be seen at 3. I know some practitioners didn't want it to be back on site in person, because that may mean that you're there 9 to 4. Right, or 10:30 to 4, right? So now you're able to, as the cold is setting in, you are able to practice, at your desk, which is a relief to a lot of practitioners, older practitioners, me, right? Any practitioner, I think. But what it's supposing is that tenants have access to the internet, that all tenants have access to the internet, right? Which is not true. So at some point, equity may not dictate, and I think there'll be workarounds around it, but not everyone has the Wi-Fi, right? I've had tenants on the other side who say, I'm using my phone died, or my phone service got cut off, I don't have the money, right? Not everyone has Wi-Fi or even steady Wi-Fi. So we assume a lot, and to the extent that the court, how does the court find equity, right? Equal access to justice, right? If it's doing everything on Teams, a lot of people don't have internet again.
Right.
So that's another thing.
Altagracia Pierre Outerbridge, our guest on our program here on The Fan. I'm Bob Salter. Sports Edge with Rick Wolf follows our 7 o'clock look around the sporting world. Now, I mentioned in introducing you, founder, owner of New York City-based law firm Outerbridge Law PC, which is on the web at Outerbridge Law, that's all is one word.com. One other area I wanted to touch upon when we're talking about housing, and this is something that a lot of people can relate to. There was a poll that came out recently. I'd like to get your thoughts on some of what was talked about in that, or addressed in that poll, because it surrounded this idea of housing costs being a big concern, especially for urban residents. I guess the simple question to ask is, or to phrase it in this way, is obviously costs are going up. Okay. How bad is it?
It's bad. It's bad. We know that people are returning to New York City, right? So rents are going back up. Housing was always a crisis in New York City, affordable housing specifically. From my research right before speaking to you, 42% of New Yorkers are rent burdened. That means specifically that over 30% of your pre-tax income goes to rent, right? So that's 42%. Then 23% are severely rent burdened. That means more than 50% of their pre-tax income goes to rent. So housing was always an issue, right? With this pandemic, it's more as people left empty apartments, we got some type of a relief. Folks are coming back. We know that in July 2021, there was the highest amount of new lease signings on record, right, since 2008. So folks are coming back to New York, which means that the lease prices are going up. But New York was always an expensive city. Affordable housing was always an issue. We have represented developers. It's very hard to develop affordable housing on the other end. Very, very hard. In terms of the approval process, the zoning ordinances, right? Being profitable. How do you build affordable housing and be profitable? It's a lot. It's a lot for a developer to think about, right? Coming into an area that may not be welcoming to a developer. So while we all want affordable housing, or most people do, coming in as a developer and making friends in the neighborhood is hard, because that means probably that you're going to be making noise for a while, right? It's very hard. There's a lot going on when you are developing a property, having access agreements with the neighbors, right? Your permits, right? What materials do you use? Union labor, right? Which I'm very much in favor of, but it's a lot for a developer to actually develop affordable housing. So while we need it, it's very hard to do.
Even what some might consider to be a simplistic idea, the whole idea of even talking about the idea of developing multifamily housing, okay, because in some areas that's going to be met with immediate resistance. Okay. For developers, I mean, how do they get past some of that no way in my area attitude?
You got to make friends on the local level, right? That's one thing. Sometimes you have to get, many lawyers. Zoning ordinances, right? Access, again, at 881 access agreements with the neighbors, because you may need to use their property to build a part of it. Noise, right? You may have to put a ladder somewhere that's not quite yours, right? 881 agreements are, keeping folks happy while you build for a year or two, right? There's a lot. Buying the next property so you can expand, So there's a whole lot of lawyers involved, making friends at the community level, knowing the community you're moving into, right? Maybe being part of the community already is a big deal because the board, right? The community board, right? Folks who know you to be a person of integrity as a developer. So it's very very hard, and it's something that you have to investigate as a developer before you spend millions of dollars.
And realize that you're also likely going to face because it's procedural in nature, a whole lot of administrative delays.
Correct. Correct. So we've
Especially
actually seen have firsthand. I'm sorry. We've
you
seen
you face them normally, but I'm assuming especially now you throw in the whole COVID aspect into things too.
absolutely. It's hard. It's not. I mean, I don't envy any developer, right? As much as they are villainized, I don't envy any developer. It takes a lot of heart. It takes a lot of guts, right? It takes a lot of investment. I've seen developers mortgage parents' homes,
Mm,
right?
mm,
It's just really not that they have it, they are really trying to take a chance on a property, on being a developer, right? It takes a certain individual to become a developer, risk taker, somebody who can still sleep at night with all the pressure, right? Getting investors, people to buy into your idea, right? Inspections, making sure the property is not lemon. I mean, it's just so much. And I have been, I would say privileged to see that train of thought from many, many developers. And for me, I don't know how they do it.
mm. All right, let's shift over in our discussion to another area that I mentioned when we started our discussion here on the program, and that is this whole idea of immigration. You, in your background, you're someone who has been through the immigration process, but you're also an immigration attorney. How proud are you of that fact?
I I love being an immigrant. I mean, I didn't choose it; it chose me. I love being Haitian. We have a very, very I just was speaking to my friend right before you, who's also an Haitian, and she's also an attorney. And I mean, we have a rich culture, in terms of our language, our literature. I mean, I it shapes me, intellectually. It shapes me in many, many ways. My father was a notary in Haiti. He was a professional. He was an entrepreneur. I left when I was 15, so I mean, in ninth grade. So I'm very, very Haitian, right? I had to learn English when I got here in the 10th grade. So that's really where I come from.
How tough was it leaving at that point in your life? What was that like?
Well, I would say the younger the better, right? So at 15, I think it would have been harder the older, but how tough was it? I don't know that it at that age you accommodate to everything. It was tough, right? Just like we all face tough situations in life, but I think 15 was better than 18 or 20 or 21 because
Mm-hmm.
I got to finish high school. I got to learn English before the college phase, right? It was hard, it was hard. Prepositions, stand up or stand down, huge, right? Like finding out which one means what and realizing stand up means this and stand down means something adversarial, right? The English language is not easy to learn, right? But what I did find when I got here was that I'm a native French speaker and Creole speaker, and a lot of programs welcome those language skills. So I was able to do well with the language skills. And if you speak French, especially as Haitians speak multiple languages, it's probably a little bit easier to pick up English. I mean, we also are very smart and resilient people. So I was able to um, spend a lot of time in French class, right, as I developed the English skills. And I actually majored in French in college, French and biology. But that was, it created a home for me where I could actually just speak, right, without, because then I was home half the time. Because I could speak my native language. I taught French to other a teaching assistant of French to other students. I went to college on a French scholarship, so which made it coming in as an expert on something builds confidence, right? And it's not that it was my native language. So I mean, it was clear confidence that I can speak it because I've been speaking French for 15 years. So that's how I came in. It actually brought a lot of opportunities and it still does.
Now, I have to ask you to give us an idea of what it was like in Haiti when you were growing up versus what you're seeing and hearing now, and what we're all seeing and hearing now about Haiti today.
I would say Haiti is always the same and has also gotten worse. These stories I heard then, right? I heard as a child. I remember being home and my father saying, turn off all the lights, right? That there's something called déchoucage, which is, they also pair labor, which is um, burning people with tires, right? So I remember being home probably 12, 13, and my father saying, turn off all the lights, right? Because these folks with the tires are going around, right? Folks who are protesting rightfully, unrightfully, right? But live burnings, I've seen live burnings as a child, leaving school and, in a car and seeing, my mother saying, turn your head, right? And seeing somebody being burned, right? With a tire around their neck. So Haiti is the same and it's worse. So I'm not even sure which way, but I've seen a lot. And my father complained of the same things. He passed away when we got here, but he complains of the same things we're complaining now, right? Lack of a steady government, lack of a justice system, right? My father was an intellectual, very, very, he was a Renaissance man, right? He complained about the lack of a judicial system, right? The criminal justice system is practically non-existent, right? The civil justice system is practically non-existent. Without offending anyone, it needs to be, actually work, right? Ownership of property is not fully respected, right? Just like here, you have a deed that actually means you own it. That may not be the case in Haiti, right? So it's just not at all a stable environment. So when I hear it, am I shocked? Yes. Emotionally, intellectually, probably not.
Hmm. And when you see these images that we've seen of people crossing to try to get into this country, what is going through your mind at the time as you witness that?
I feel like it's my cousin, right? Or my sister. Or I mean, if I say to people sometimes that all Haitians are related because there's not that many of us, right? So um genetically we're related, right? Because it's a small country. I see my family. I see my family. We have the same features. This is me. This is me. I see the children and I think, oh my God, that could be my niece, right? That could be that's my family. They actually are my family because we share the same blood. So it's very personal.
Hmm. What would you say is the biggest misperception about Haiti and Haitians?
Wow. Wow. I don't know. I don't know. I guess I never bought into it, but I don't know. I think people I mean, Haitians are economically poor, but intellectually, in terms of richness of culture, we are a very, very wealthy people. So we may be seen as the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. I'll tell you that Haitian people are so rich. Um, and I'm someone that's hard to please and keep good, but a Haitian, you sit with a Haitian, you're probably laughing the whole time. We love to learn. Education is huge for any Haitian person you meet. Being educated, being, doing well in school, and Haitians are very ambitious people. Very ambitious, very education's huge for us. So we may be poor economically, but Haitians have a very wealthy intelligence. We value intelligence, we value education. So any Haitian you meet, whether or not they can read, I can tell you that's a very smart person.
What a wonderful discussion with Altagracia Pierre Outerbridge, the founder, owner of the New York City based law firm Outerbridge Law PC. on the web at outerbridgelaw, all is one word.com. Thank you so much for joining us on our program.
Thank you, Mr. Salter. You're wonderful.
It's a wonderful discussion, an awful lot of fun as well. And thank you for the perspectives that you've shared with us. Continued success in your work and happiness.
Thank you. See you soon, hopefully.
Yeah, see how easy that was? And the dog didn't bark once. I'm very, very impressed.
I'm very shocked. He's been eating the plushies, my son's plushies. I'm very shocked, actually. I think your voice soothed them. I really
Oh, good.
do. You have the voice. You have the
Good,
voice.
good. I'm glad that worked in that regard. Excellent. All right. So this will be on the air tomorrow morning on WFAN. But thank you again very much. You
My
stay
very
well.
pleasure. Thank you. Have a good
Take
night.
care now. Bye-bye.